want to welcome you tonight to our kind of elder talk on social media and the church. As you've heard from us before, the title we're giving this talk is From the Overflow of the Heart, Your Keyboard Types. And you'll see why we're talking about, or you're titling it that way in just a little bit. But to begin our time tonight, we want to begin just giving praise to our God through song. And then after that, I'm going to have a few announcements, some housekeeping items for us, and then we're going to get into the talk immediately. The aim tonight is to spend a half an hour I'm going to teach for about a half an hour, and then we'll see how far we get into the talk, and then we'll stop, and we're going to spend another half an hour then in corporate prayer. And then next week, we're actually going to cancel our Zoom prayer meeting. We're going to invite everybody back and do part 2 of this talk. And then we're also going to have an elder panel next Wednesday as well, Lord willing. So I'll say more about that in just a little bit. When I told people that I was speaking for half an hour, most of you just laughed, and I don't know why you laughed. Shame on you. But we're going to do it tonight. So,
don't start the clock
Jason, you be quiet. We're going to sing in just a little bit. Why don't you stand? Let's begin our time by giving praise to our God together. We're good. That's all the giveaways. All right, does everyone have a copy of the handout? All right, so hold on to that. I'm going to ask you to hold on to that, just not for tonight, but for next week as well, because we're not going to finish this tonight. So we'll see how far we can get tonight before we move into our time of prayer. But let me just get started. Why are we having a talk? Why are we having a talk like this on social media in the church? The first text that you're going to see in your handouts there is Matthew 12, 34b through 36. Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. 2 observations out of that verse. One is we can't look into each other's hearts. We don't have spiritual x-ray vision to see people's hearts. Only the Holy Spirit, only God can do that. But Jesus says you can tell something about a person's heart by their words, by what they communicate. So tonight we're thinking specifically about the form of communication of social media. But everything that we're talking about even though we're kind of zeroing in particularly on social media, it's going to apply on all forms of communication. And so I think that Jesus' word here in Matthew 12 is particularly helpful for us. And then you'll see the second observation there is that last sentence there where we will give account. Let this sink in. We will give account for every careless word we speak. And so 2 observations from that. One is what we say matters vertically. In other words, we will answer to God for every careless word we speak or type on the computer. And that should shape how we communicate. And what we say matters horizontally. We communicate. The purpose of communication is intimacy. If the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, you don't know my heart unless I speak to you. So the aim of communication is for you to know me and me to know you. And so the right use of communication is intimacy and closeness, relationship, so that we may know each other's hearts. So this matters horizontally because it affects our relationships. Not just what we say, but what we type on social media also affects our relationships as a church. And I say that more than just a matter of us getting along. Our unity matters for our public witness as a church and for the glory of God. John 13, 34 and 35, Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, by that you would love one another as I have loved you. By this the world will know who my disciples are, by your love for one another, including how we speak with our words. So that has an effect on our public witness. One of the things just to note about social media is that there is no referee, right? You can say whatever you want, really. And I know that there are some extremes that have you might get censored at times, but there is really no referee. So what's interesting about that is that when you look at what's going on social media sometimes, it really feels like we're in the book of Judges. And if you're familiar with the book of Judges, there was no king in Israel at that time. This is Samuel was kind of in charge in terms of humanly speaking, but God was their king. And the book of Judges ends this way. And you'll see that quote there. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so social media can feel a lot like that. When you pull the referee out, when you pull the king out, it's just a free-for-all. People do whatever they want, say whatever they want. But we need to remember, and part of the reason we're having this talk is, although there was no king in Israel at that time, and although there might feel like there's no king on social media, we serve a king. And we must submit to that king as our ruler, including how we use social media. So that's why we're having this talk tonight. So let me just offer 3 quick housekeeping items for tonight that might be helpful for kind of framing what we're doing. Number 1, much of what we're talking about tonight is a matter of wisdom. What I mean by that is when you're reading wisdom literature, it's kind of showing us how the world works. But it doesn't show every kind of possible outcome. It shows us in general this is the way the world works. So we're going to talk about principles that come from God's word that should shape the way that we think about communication on social media. But we still need to do the hard work of applying those principles in the unique conversations, relationships, and circumstances that we find ourselves in. And that just requires wisdom. So the illustration I often give when we talk about wisdom literature is if you're reading the book of Proverbs, think about it this way. God has given us a roadmap for how the world works. And Proverbs is saying, this is how you should live your life wisely. This is how you can live a skillful life, right? The problem is that map was, Genesis 1 and 2 before sin, that map was perfect. The world always worked that way, and the map was a perfect guide. Sin into the picture, and there was an earthquake, kind of so to speak, and now there's road barriers and roads that are jagged and crooked. So in general, it still gets us where we need to go. It's still showing us how the world works. But now there's brokenness in this world, and it's hard. It's not always a perfect match. So we need God's wisdom and help in that, and the rest of Scripture helps us guide us in that. Again, you might be sitting here tonight and saying, well, I don't have a social media account. That's okay. Even the things that we're talking about, everything we're talking about tonight still applies to other forms of communication, whether it's a phone call or in-person, face-to-face communication. A lot of these things still apply. Second observation, housekeeping item. Our focus tonight is our church family. What we mean by that is you might be on social media and some celebrity or politician post something that's really provocative or angers you or it's really important. That is important, but we're not talking about that tonight. What we're talking about tonight, we're going to kind of focus our attention onto you as a member of this church. So we're focusing, first of all, on individual Christians who are members of First Baptist, and then us collectively as a church family. So that's our focus tonight in this talk. Third housekeeping item is we're not going to cover everything tonight. I might leave you frustrated that I'm not covering everything. But what we want to do is invite you to email the elders any question that you have on this topic of social media in the church. Now, we're not going to have time to answer all of your questions, but over the next week, we want to invite you to email us those questions. You'll see the email address, elders@firstbaptist.com, and then next week, we'll finish this talk, and then we'll take the last part of that time just to have an elder panel where we try to address some of the questions that you emailed us throughout this week. So again, we're not going to be able to exhaust the topic, but we're doing our best to try to address some of the pertinent issues and some of the specific questions that you might have on this topic. Does that make sense? All right. So you'll see in your notes there the blue kind of the section heading. I'm going to begin with the definition and the nature of social media, just to kind of give us some what we're talking about. In the next page, we're going to look at your social media. So before you post and you use your social media platform, ask yourself these questions. And then I think next week what we're going to cover is the next category, their social media. How should I respond to their posts? And then the last category that you'll see in your notes there is a bonus. What if I posted the thing that was hard? How should I respond to somebody who corrects me for my post? So we're going to try to cover those 4 areas over the next 2 weeks. So we'll try to cover the first 2 sections tonight, the next 2 sections next week. That's kind of our aim in terms of time. All right, so let's start with definitions and the nature of social media. So just as a working, simple definition for us, what is social media? You'll see there in the definition, it's a form of electronic communication through which users create online communities. So platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Pinterest, there's more that I I know are out there. It's hard to keep up with the new platforms, but these are very prominent, popular social media platforms that we're talking about tonight. Okay, that's the definition. What about the nature of social media? Let me just offer 4 things that I want us to keep in mind. Its limitations, the nature of it being a tool, the platform, and its global nature. So first of all, social media has limitations. We can't see, when you're on social media, we can't see body language. You know, there's certain things that we communicate with our body language. Some of us are more demonstrative than others, but all that's not, you can't see body language. You can't hear tone. You can't hear intonation. Intonation is just us emphasizing certain words, and intonation and tone and body language will actually change a sentence based on tone, intonation, and body language. So as an example, there's a very big, you can have one statement, that's fine. But there's a big difference between, that's fine, versus, that's fine! Right? Same sentence, same 2 words, tone drastically changes the meaning of that. All of that is lost on social media because you can't hear tone, see body language, or intonation. So it's not that we can't communicate, but it's a communication that's limited by the medium itself. We can easily, we can't, so not only there are certain limitations there, we also can't ask clarifying questions in real time that we naturally do in face-to-face communication. So in any friendship, marriage, family, church membership, anytime you're talking to another person and somebody says something that's confusing, you might just say, well, did you mean this by that? And in real time, then you're able to track with each other better. But in social media, there's not that ability to, in real time, ask clarifying questions, which means that with all these limitations, social media is predisposed or inclined to miscommunication. It is a garden filled with the weeds of miscommunication. There's a book that Neil Postman wrote in the 1980s. It's a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he actually provides a really helpful illustration about how a medium, the type of tool that you're using to communicate something, how the medium is itself the metaphor. And he gives this illustration of how in the past you have these Native Americans would use smoke signals to communicate certain things. So what's the medium when they're communicating? It's the smoke signal. You have a fire and you're using a blanket or something to communicate signals, right? But if you choose to use the medium of smoke signals to teach philosophy, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You're going to run out of wood and blankets, and the audience is going to be lost, and it's going to be miscommunicated. So it's a good tool of communication, but it has its limitations. So the point is that when we're thinking about certain types of communication, certain topics, we need to be careful about the medium that we choose because it affects our ability to communicate, or certain ways are more ripe for miscommunication. So next item there, it has its limitations. Social media, though, number 2, is a neutral tool that can be useful or harmful. So what I don't want you to hear from this talk, what the elders don't want you to hear from this talk is that we think that technology is evil, that social media is evil. It's not. It's a wonderful tool. It's a neutral tool, right? You can use a hammer to build something very productive. You can hammer a nail to build a house, but you can also use that hammer to kill someone. But it's not the hammer's fault. It's just that it depends what makes the tool harmful or useful. The user, right? And so social media is not the problem. It's our hearts that are the problem. But I think, but given that, we need to be careful in how we use that instrument. So I think that that social media can be useful for lots of good things. And just as an example, it can be useful for posting pictures of your family, or what you ate for dinner that night, or for your if you want to show pictures of your family to relatives who live elsewhere. It can be useful for encouragement. It can be useful to communicate things that you're thankful for. It can be useful for scripture or or edifying quotations. It can be useful for entertainment. I've read some pretty funny jokes from people on social media. There's good uses of that, right? Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So that can be a helpful guide for thinking about how we can use this as a helpful tool, knowing that it can be prone to miscommunication. Negatively, it is normally, and I don't say always, but it is normally ineffective or unhelpful for complex, emotionally charged issues or as a tool to persuade. So if you're trying to talk about a complex issue, emotionally charged issue, or use it as a tool to persuade, probably a wrong tool. It's like using a smoke signal to communicate philosophy. Good luck, right? So I think it's just good to know the nature of the tool and its limitations, and so we don't try to use it for the wrong thing, or else we're gonna run into problems. Third thing there is that social media gives an equal platform both to the wise and to the fool, the expert and the amateur. This is one of the things that has revolutionized communication in the last 20 years or more. But with no referee, you have a chance to talk to everyone, and we don't know your credentials. It used to be that you kind of had to earn the right to speak to a broader audience. You had to be the expert. You had to have a proven record. You had to have education or whatever, the PhD. But now the PhD can be debunked by one snarky comment from one guy sitting in his mom's basement, and who knows nothing about the topic. And it gives an equal platform, and we just need to keep that in mind in this conversation. Fourth, it is global. Two things I want to say about that. One is that it's a global audience. What you say online, not only is it permanent, you think you can delete stuff? Rob, can we delete stuff? No, you can't. It's there permanently. Not only is it permanent, but you're saying it to the world. It is called the World Wide Web for a reason. And I know that we have this is my platform, I have my friends, no one else can see this. Kind of. It gets out there. Trust me. You're speaking to the world. The second thing is that it opens us up to a global concern. And in some respects, that's really a good thing. It helps us to see some of the things in the world that we couldn't see before. But I think, so although that's good in some sense, we also need to remember that we are not God. Our God is omnipresent, which means he's everywhere at the same time. Our God is omniscient, which means he knows all things. And I think when a tool like social media opens up us up to a global concern, we can feel like we need to know everything and try to do everything about everything. And we're going to overwhelm ourselves and run ourselves into the ground if we don't remember that we're not God. God does not get bothered by that. God is not getting overwhelmed by that. But we, who are limited creatures, can. So I think we need to remember that. Ecclesiastes reminds us that as created beings, we have God-given limitations. And Ecclesiastes encourages us to embrace those limitations, accept our not being God, and that's actually the pathway to joy. To enjoy a good meal, to enjoy a good drink, to enjoy your family, the path to that is to actually, I'm not going to try to be God. I'm going to embrace my limitations. There's certain things I don't know. There's certain things I can't affect change in. I'm going to let God be God on that. But social media kind of subtly leads us to thinking that we can. All right, so that's our working definition and the nature of social media. If you go to the next page there, I want to try to cover, see how far we can get here on your social media. So if you have a social media platform, I'm not going to ask any further questions on this, so don't worry. I just want to know how many of you, by raise of hand, have some form of social media account? Okay. How many of you don't? I'm just curious. Okay, none at all. Okay, all right. Yeah, texting is not, that's just a tool to communicate. That's like the phone. Yeah, that's all right. All right, so if you have, again, keep in mind, if you don't have a social media platform, don't worry, this is not going to be for nothing for you. You can still apply these things in how you communicate in general or how you help others. Maybe your own kids who do have a social media platform. But if you do, before you post something, we want to encourage you to ask these questions, to consider these things. Number one, what is my motivation in posting this? I love that New Yorker cartoon there. Make sure you see how insignificant I am. It's just a reminder. Sometimes we actually are trying to prove our significance to the world when in fact, one of the things that Scripture actually helps us with, you think of Psalm 8. Psalm 8, the psalmist says, when I consider the work of God's hands, what is man that you are mindful of him? Our significance comes from the fact that our Creator, who rules the universe that we cannot even see with our eyes, is mindful of you. So us trying to say, I'm significant, is to overlook the fact that we already have our significance in the fact that God is mindful of us. Before you post something, what's your motivation in posting this? Sometimes that's hard to know, but a couple of questions. Am I posting this to be noticed? Am I posting this to be heard? Am I posting this to be affirmed? Am I posting this to be liked? The fact that our social media platforms have a like button does not help us in this. It's actually setting us up to say, I want immediate approval of what people, I want to know what you think about me, right? It's actually feeding the fear of man in our lives. One writer said this on this topic. He said, social media has become the place for us to get control over the presentation of ourselves, to get feedback about the presentation with unprecedented scale and speed, and then to constantly calibrate and curate our identities in order to get affirmation from our chosen community. So, social media, he argues, is not primarily a place of public discussion of ideas. The ideas are ways to define oneself. I think he's right. We like to think of social media as this neutral place to share ideas. And in one sense it is, but the human heart is deceptive. Given the nature of social media, I think that there's a very strong proclivity in us to actually use it as a place to create a social media identity. And we actually curate that by posting stuff in order to say, this is who I am. This is the color of carpet that I like. This is the kind of car I like. This is my opinions about politics. This is my opinions about this. And we're presenting an identity. And when somebody disagrees with that identity, that's why we often respond in a vitriol fashion, because any disagreement with that is like a personal affront. That's who I am, we think, even though it's not necessarily true. So we're all prone to this. I think we need to beware of that temptation. And I think that we need to be aware that when we're isolated as we are in context like a pandemic, it's even more heightened. Social media use is more, we rely on that more during a pandemic when we're isolated. So we need to be all the more careful of that temptation. Looking to others to define our identity can be detrimental to our soul. Think about what Jesus said in John 5:44. How can you believe if you receive the praise that comes from man, but you are not willing to seek the praise that comes from God? It's detrimental to our soul, it's toxic for our relationships, and it affects the whole church. A couple of texts there, Proverbs 21:2. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. And then 1 Corinthians 4:3-4. But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself. For I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. So the freedom from this is found in fearing God and recognizing that his opinion of me is ultimate. My identity is rooted in him. Number two, second question to ask yourself, is this edifying? Edifying is a word that means, is this going to build up the other person or tear them down? Will it build up and give grace to the hearer? So this might be a good header verse for this whole section. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to the hearer. So if you're wondering, what's a verse that I can go to know whether or not I should say this or post this? This is a good one to memorize. Before you speak or type, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. Some? None. Let no corrupting talk. But okay, so then what should I say? But only such as is good for building up. That's absolute. No corrupting, only building up. Number three, is this the right time? You can say something that's true, but the timing is so wrong, it actually ends up blowing up in your face. And Ephesians 4:29 recognizes that. When Paul says, does it fit the occasion? So it's not just, is it true, but does it fit the occasion? In fact, if you go back to Ephesians 4:15, he says, speak the truth in what? In love. And love recognizes and asks, is this the right timing? Right? One proverb here is Proverbs 27:14. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, will be counted as a cursing. I joked earlier when I preached through Proverbs, I did this with my wife. I sang to her at 6:30, and it did not go well for me. Not because it wasn't true and I didn't mean it well, it just was the wrong timing. 6:30 is not the right time to sing to my wife. Good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright shining faces. Yeah, she didn't like that. This verse is not in your handout, but I encourage you to actually write this verse down. Proverbs 17:14. Let me encourage you to look at this verse later on this week. Here's what it says. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. So here's the image. Proverbs 17:14. Imagine the image for the quarrel is a dam. So imagine Hoover Dam. You all have Hoover Dam in your mind? Big cement wall. Behind it is billions of gallons of water. Okay, so imagine you are Hoover Dam. You're personifying the Hoover Dam, okay? Behind you is water pushing against you, and you're holding back the water. As the water rises, what happens? The pressure against you gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and you feel the burden of that. And I think that sometimes there's something that happens in our life, that's something that happens in the culture, there's something that happens that makes us so troubled, that makes us so angry, that gets us so worked up. If I don't say something, I'm going to burst. You ever feel that way? Proverbs has wisdom for you. Proverbs says, drop the matter before the dispute breaks out. Well, how do I do that? Because does it feel good to get it off your chest? Yes, and we kind of hide behind the disguise, well, I'm just being real. Yeah, be real in private, right? So I think his point is that, for application for us is that one of the ways that we can deal with this is, number one, go to God. Go to God with that overwhelming pressure, that burden, that's anger, that's frustration. Go to God. Pour out your heart to him. Let him absorb your frustration, your anger, your questions. Let him be a refuge. Cast that burden on God because he can carry it. He can absorb it. Well, do you ever feel like you're praying and trying to do that and you're just stuck and it's just like, this ain't working? Your prayer is hitting the ceiling. Well, what else do? Talk to a godly friend in person. A godly friend in person about that. Normally, and I would encourage you, don't choose somebody who always agrees with you and who's going to only stoke your anger. Maybe choose a godly person who can actually hear you, be a sounding board for you, and then point you back to God. That's who you want to talk to. They can actually help you go to God and cast that burden on him. Because if we go online and get it off our chest, that image of a dam breaching, that means that the dam broke. Think of the destruction that lays in the path of that broken Hoover Dam. That's what Proverbs is meaning to show. And if you don't believe me, say something in anger or provocative online and just watch the comment sections. The dam is broken, the destruction just rips through the internet right there. It's happening all the time. So Proverbs 17:14. Okay, one more. We're going to do number 4 and we're going to stop here for prayer. Will this be easily misunderstood? Will this be easily misunderstood? In the next page of page 3, you'll see the text I want to look at. Now, when you think about your social media platform, I think some people bristle. They kind of kick against this question about will it be easily misunderstood? And the thinking is like this. Why am I being responsible for how they hear me? If they're offended, that's on them. I'm just being real. I'm just telling my opinions. This is my social media platform. I'm just saying what I think. You ever thought that or heard somebody say that? So I don't hold me responsible for how you respond to me. And so they bristle at this question of, will this be easily misunderstood? And I want to say, in one sense, that's right. Romans 12:18 says, live at peace with all men insofar as it depends upon you. So there is a limitation. We can't control how somebody's going to respond to us. But I think that love compels us to ask this question about, will this be easily misunderstood? To have the attitude that it's my platform and I don't care how, what you think about this or misunderstand it, is to be individualistic at best. It is to be selfish at worst. You remember Genesis 4, if we, like Cain, ask, am I my brother's keeper? You know what the right answer to that question is? Yes. Especially when you think about the fact that you have covenanted with First Baptist Church of Marlboro, saying, Alyssa, I'm your keeper. Jason Brown, I'm your keeper. Janice, I'm your keeper. You're my keeper. We're each other's keeper. So, yes, we are each other's keeper. Scripture does not depict the church as a group of islands of people doing their own thing, and we just kind of come together for a sermon and sing some songs. That's not biblical. The biblical image, one of the biblical images for the church is that of a body. Look at 1 Corinthians 12. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. We are not islands. We are individuals. You have a personal relationship with God, but that's not the whole picture. You also are a member of a body. My hand cannot say, I don't care what my face is saying. No, we're one. Like, we've got to work together here. Like, my hand affects my face. And so what you say affects me. What I say affects you. And we're a family. We're a body. We weep together. We rejoice together. And so we can't just say, well, it's on you. Like, we need to ask the question, will this be misunderstood? And if it's likely to be misunderstood out of love, maybe you shouldn't post it. All right. We have 5, 6, and 7 to go, but I'm going to try to keep my word, and we're going to stop there. So we're going to come back to this next Wednesday, Lord willing. We'll finish this section and then the next section on their social media, how we should respond. And I think the next section is the first section that we're in right now is more straightforward. The next section is when we're talking about how do we deal with somebody who's posted something that was confusing or hurtful or sinful or something like that. That's where we need to kind of work through those things together. That's where some of the issues lie for us. So we need to think carefully through this. So we'll pause here. The reason I want us to pray tonight and next week is because of why we always need to pray. And we can give talks, we can read books, we can relook at principles, but friends, like, we need the Lord to work in our hearts. We need the Lord to help us in this. So let me just encourage you to go to page 6 of your handout there. And there's just 7 things I want us to pray through tonight. So we're going to kind of handle this like we normally do in a prayer meeting. I'm going to just assign 7 things. And if you